Welcome to Brew Shed. This is our second video. Tonight we are talking about the safety aspects of making your own DIY boilers for all grain brewing. With us tonight we have Mark, who's a friend of the Brew Shed and the Motley Brew. He's an electrician, and we're going to ask him a few questions on the safety aspects of using kettle elements in boilers. A lot of people, when they're making their DIY boilers, they use standard kettle elements like these. These are 2,700 watts or 2.7 kilowatts. You would see a lot of people use two of these in a brewery keg where they're making kegerators, or they even use them in plastic fermenters like this. They will drill a hole in the plastic fermenter and put a kettle element into it. So this evening we want to talk about the safety aspects of using kettle elements in boilers. So I'd like to ask Mark, what's your, these obviously recently on one of the homebrew pages, there was a system which had two brewery kegs with two of these elements in it, and what is the safety aspects of using 2.7 kilowatts in a keg?
On your domestic house, you'll have 2.5 wire in your circuit. So a 2.7 kilowatt element is going to draw approximately 11.5 amps. Now that's fine in your kettle, in your kitchen. It's what, 3-4 minutes to boil your kettle. The circuit's not been overly stressed, your breaker, everything's protected. If you stick two of these into a bucket and then you put two leads into your twin socket, straight away you're drawing over 22 amps out of the one circuit. So your wire's been put under pressure, your breaker's been put under pressure, your socket on the wall has been put under pressure.
What is the recommended amps to go through a 2.5 cable?
Maximum recommended for a 2.5 cable is 20 amps, but that would be for a short duty cycle. It wouldn't be intended for an hour and a half, whatever.
Right.
It would be a short cycle. An example would be, you'd see your Triton shower there, which is 10 kilowatts at times, or electric shower more so. It would draw 35 to 40 amps for a few minutes. If you were to sit in your shower for half the day, your wire wouldn't take that kind of pressure.
Okay.
It's like the wires are rated, but they're not intended for constant duty. If you're wiring a house, what they say is this wire is really specified for about 16 amps, 60 amp breaker, and 20 amps is its maximum. But you'll see by and large electrical contractors will put in a 20 amp breaker. It's the maximum allowed.
So is what you're saying is that these elements are only designed for heating water, small amounts of water, like a kettle, like 1.5 litres for 3 minutes, but not running for constant use for an hour.
Short duty cycle. I suppose an example a lot of people would be familiar with, if you've seen the old years ago in your sitting room, a 2-bar electric fire which was drawing 2.5 kilowatts, which is almost the same as these, and from being constantly plugged in and used again and again and again, you saw the socket was scorched.
Right.
So that was a high resistance point. It got hot, and you did have fires. There was fires. So you're damaging your socket, you're damaging your wiring if you're drawing a full load regularly. So it's ideal not to do it.
So if you were now obviously you're going to be bringing water up to boiling point for when you're boiling. Now when you're mashing, you're using 65 to 70. Yeah. Now, if these were on a thermostat for an hour, would that be an issue as well?
A thermostat is just controlling it's a temperature switch. So for mashing, the mashing, you wouldn't even have one of these in a mashing tun, I think, because you'd burn your grains. You would burn
the bag probably, because it's only coming on at full power.
Yeah, this comes on at full power.
Okay.
It'll come on for maybe a minute or two until the temperature stat sees the rise, and it'll stop again. But ideally, they're not good. Not for, and then you've so many watts squeezed in as well into a short space. These would get hot. Even I would imagine in a work boiler, you would get a burning effect.
I've seen a system there recently, and the person had an oven switch, like a thermostat oven switch.
Yeah.
Now, is the element still coming on at full power?
Yes, the element is still coming on at full power.
Until it gets to that temperature?
Yes. So
Okay.
there's no variable, like this is on or off. It's a digital device essentially. It comes on, it goes off. And when it is on, it's at full power. So the ideal solution would be to get an element that's much bigger with a bigger surface area. There's various different types. You can get ones that are like a flat sheet of metal, and put them in the bottom, and then you've a whole surface area to work with.
But if they're running the same amps, does it still have the same issues?
The amps, yes, you will still have the same amps issues with your house. Now you could get a 32 amp socket supply wired directly from your board, especially for this. But I don't see people now going to that kind of bother. It'll be, if they're building a home-built keg with two of these elements in it, they're not after investing in a proper element. They're not going to invest in a proper socket supply either.
You see some things. You know, there's a website called the Electric Brewery. They use control panels.
Yeah.
Does that have built-in breakers in the control panel to prevent too much power going through the cable?
If you're building a control panel specifically for your cables and for your heating elements, presumably you'll have a heavy-duty supply coming to that panel, and then in that panel you'll have specific breakers and wiring for each element. So essentially it's like having your own, that panel is essentially having your own distribution board, breaker board at the location with a heavy supply coming to it. Now if they plug that distribution, if they plug the electric panel into the same 13 amp socket that they're using to plug in their kegerator, it's the same problem again.
Same issues.
It's supply. It's the supply is the important part. So your wire is not rated for a heavy supply, and your socket's not rated for a heavy supply, and your breaker is struggling.
If the breaker didn't, if you didn't blow the MCB, the circuit breaker didn't break the supply of power, then what's the issue with the cable if you are running the, as you were saying,
So
23 amps?
If you're running a cable under constant load, as we mentioned earlier, you have the socket, you'll see the scorch marks and the burns. That has now become a high resistance point. It's a candidate for fires in the future. If you keep running this 2.5 twin inert, now the older cables had inert in the centre. If the electrician, when he was installing it, did anything like that, it'll create hot spots, and eventually the wire will fail, the insulation will fail at the hot spots. The newer houses, since last September, the wire I think has changed. It's now 3 cores, 3 of them are insulated. It's more robust.
Right.
But still, if you're running at 20 amps for a long time and constantly abusing it, you're going to get hot spots, you're going to get damage, you're going to get breakages, and your links or connections, so at the breaker, at the socket, all of these are under pressure and will eventually fail. It's a fire hazard.
So when it fails, the cable is getting too hot because there's too much current going through it.
Yeah, and the insulation can break down, bad connections become hotter and hotter. A connection that has been heating gets worse with time.
So if you were using your boiler every twice a month for 6 months, then you're obviously putting too much current through this cable, and over time it's going to melt, and obviously you're not going to notice it melting because it's worked fine, so you presume it is fine.
Yeah.
But obviously you are creating damage every time you're doing it.
So yeah, the connections will be the big concern. You'll see it there first, back of your socket, at the fuse board, wherever there's a connection. Remember as well, this cable doesn't go from each socket straight back to the fuse board. This goes from one socket to the next to the next. It's a daisy chain, and each of them is a connection, and that connection can fail anywhere along the chain.
Could you, if you did have 2 elements going into a keg, could you have it on 2 different circuits?
You could, but if you consider that a lot of the houses are wired in ring mains, so your kitchen will be on one ring, and the rest of your downstairs is on another ring, and then your upstairs is on another ring, well then you're going to have an extension lead or something to go from, say, one zone with one element and another zone with another element. And I can't see people going to that kind of bother, to be honest.
So is what you're saying is that most of the circuits downstairs are all on the one. They're all in the one circuit. They're all in the one MCB.
Usually, you'll have a downstairs circuit and then a kitchen circuit separate.
The cooker switch will be separate to the.
Well, the sockets in the kitchen will be separate from the rest of the downstairs. The kitchen, because of the fact, again, back to the same reasoning, that the kitchen would have a lot of heavy appliances, and they give it a circuit of its own for that reason. But if you're going to overload that circuit with two elements running for a few hours, it could become an issue.
So your kitchen circuit would be on one separate circuit, and then the rest of the downstairs sockets will be on another separate circuit. So obviously, taking it to the extreme, if you were running your boiler for an hour, doing your rolling boil, with your two elements, or even one element for heating, and then the other one for keeping the rolling boil, and then you were, for instance, putting on the kettle to make a cup of tea because you're waiting for your boil, or putting on your washing machine, or putting on your dishwasher.
Well, at that stage, I'd imagine your breaker would trip. You're definitely going to trip a breaker. Like, these are drawing 22 amps on a 20 amp breaker.
But even if you're using one for the rolling boil, which is going to give you what, 11 amps, is it?
Yes.
And then obviously using your washing machine, dishwasher, it's obviously going to.
It'll affect it too. Yeah, I don't know if you'd maintain a rolling boil with just one element though. I would imagine a 23 litre keg, unless it was insulated, and you'd possibly need it.
You'd probably need two, because they're only really designed for heating. Sort of 1.5 litres of kettle water, isn't it? And
then another issue then, if you're using these for a rolling boil, is again back to the watt density. That surface gets pretty hot. You're going to have burning effect. It will have a negative effect on your beer.
It'll scorch it.
Scorch it, yeah, definitely.
Okay. Now you often see that kettle elements or kettles, these type of elements, the connections that come with it. Come with a heavy cable like this. Yeah. Now, obviously, this cable is rated for.
Again, that one there is 2.5. To be honest with you, the kettle elements you see, like a standard kettle lead, is usually 1.5.
Okay.
And again, rated. 1.5 wouldn't be rated for 20 amps. Obviously, each one only pulls 11 amps.
Right.
That cable, 1.5 at 11 amps, will be at its limits. For a few minutes would be fine. Again, if you're boiling using a standard kettle lead from one of these with a plug top on it for an hour, that's another weak point. It's not good. So
you need to get the proper elements.
Yeah, the proper element. It might seem like a viable option to buy one of these for a few euros. But the proper elements aren't expensive. There is companies out there that will make a proper element. There is Irish companies out there that'll do industrial elements, and they're not hard to find. These guys are good, and they'll advise you. You can even buy elements similar to these, but they're just much longer, and they'll weave around and curl back in themselves. Very same install procedure, just a lower watt density.
And will they heat quicker because they have a longer element?
No, it's the same watts. It's just
the same power.
Same power. Now you still have the problem with your hooking up to your domestic circuit. Like realistically, if you're going to be serious with using a boiler and making your own beer, the recommendation for me would be to get a 32 amp supply to a point in the house where you're going to work at this regularly. If you have a garage, stick a 32 amp socket point out there. Most fuse boards would be in the garage or maybe in the front hall.
Yeah.
Stick a socket close to it with a 32 amp supply. A local electrician should be able to do that very quickly and not too expensively. It'd be cheaper to get it done right than be.
Would that be the industrial blue socket?
No, that's only 16 amp. It's the next one up again from that.
Which is the red? Are they red?
No. Well, it is blue, but the one I know the one you're thinking of is 16 amp.
Okay.
It's the same style.
Right.
It's bigger again. It's 32 amp.
And obviously, you couldn't just put a standard, extension lead socket onto that 32 amp. You'd have to have the proper industrial socket to plug into it.
Yeah. But again, if you want to spend money, you could the electric brew system you mentioned earlier on. You could have your 32 amps, and then each of these with a proper 2.5 lead to a 16 amp. Like it's possible. But
it's just cost.
It's cost.
A lot of people when they're making DIY boilers from from what I've seen,
Cost point
is
of view.
they want to do them cheap. You know, they don't want to spend, you know, 700 or 800 euro on an all-in-one brewing system. They want to do it cheaply, and obviously when they're using kegs as well, they're making bigger batches. They're making 40-litre batches instead of standard 23-litre, and that's why they're using the likes of kettle elements, because, you know, you probably buy one of these for maybe 15 euro, 20 euro.
Yeah, it's a cost option, and to be honest, like, what you could use instead of one of these is an immersion element. It's still 2.7 kilowatts thereabouts, but it's a longer element.
It's like a long copper.
You can actually, if you bend it gently, you could even style it into a thing that I wouldn't recommend it, but it can be done. But you're still back to the thing, straining your house wiring, straining your sockets, straining your circuit boards. If I was to build one in the morning, what I'd recommend is an immersion element. You can get them with the same chrome finish. Wire it properly. It's got a stat in it for protection, and a heavy duty power supply.
Now, obviously, if you're making this stuff yourself and you're not a qualified person, and you did unfortunately have a fire in your house, then obviously this is going to cause problems with your insurance.
I wouldn't think the insurance company would cover you at all. Nowadays, insurance companies are asking for things like recce certs, and they're looking for accountability for who did what.
Yeah.
And it's becoming a bigger issue the whole time. And if you've got a DIY job that is questionable, they'll use it to wriggle out of it.
So saving yourself a couple of euro on using kettle elements is not going to save you if your house burns down, because your insurance is not going to cover you.
And like, to do it properly, like, it seems like a few bob more, but it's not in the long run.
It's not. Well, if you're making beer, you know, and it's your hobby, like, how much do you think it would cost to put in maybe a 32 amp socket? A couple hundred euro?
I'd say you get one easy for 200 euros, easy.
Yeah. And see, a lot of people,
it's close to the fuse board, even cheaper.
you know, it makes sense. You know, people don't think about these things. You don't get people, you know, they're just, you know, general public that think, oh, well, use 2 kettle elements because it'll boil quicker. But obviously, you know, it's not a good idea.
Definitely not. As I say, but even like from a beer point of view, I'm sure, like, you be the expert on the brewing the beer. I would imagine if you've burnt your grains and you're burning your liquor,
you're going to get a scorched effect. You're going to get that
taste.
You're going to get that burnt taste. Yeah.
And like, why would you do that?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that covers it all, really. You know, it does kind of, you know, it does. You know, I've often seen these even in plastic buckets like this.
Yeah, that's not good.
That, you know, obviously as these heat up, the plastic is going to heat as well. The plastic is going to go flimsy, and I know myself. I used to have a Pico boiler, and it started leaking from the element.
Yeah.
And obviously, hot water leaking onto a live cable, it's a recipe for disaster. And these, I found with these as well, these are quite a hard plastic.
Yeah.
And as they're heating and cooling and heating and cooling, they become brittle and they won't tighten, and that's when they leak.
Yeah.
And obviously people think, oh well, it won't tighten, so I'll just leave it.
Yeah. And
And then you're boiling for the hour, pouring liquid onto cables, onto live cables, and it's just not good.
Yeah, no, if I was to build a system in the morning, I'd be looking at a metal container with possibly an immersion element. It's bigger, it's more robust. But as I said, there is people out there that will build you specialist elements.
These elements will run the standard.
You can specify to the manufacturer, and this is they are in Ireland, and they're easy to deal with. You can specify the length, the watt density. You can tell them you wanted a 3 kilowatt one, you wanted 2.5, 1. You can specify anything. They're making it. You call the shots.
And will they, specially made element, will they run for the hour?
Oh, they'll run all day, every day. But again, you need to be wary of your supply. So
Okay, so they're no safer than using these.
They're no safer on the house supply side of things, and as regards heating your cables and your sockets and all that. If you're going to be using a high load, you need a high load capacity.
Okay.
That's, I suppose, the rule there. And then from a brewing point of view, I would presume low watt density is far better. So the bottom of your container, the biggest element possible.
Okay.
It's not that it's bigger wattage, it's lower watt density. So
And
no burnt beer and no burnt sockets.
And obviously you're going to want proper seals on your elements as well.
Proper seals. Again, the element manufacturer, if you explain to them what way you're mounting it, they'll design it with that in mind. You can get them, I've seen quite nice systems done where it's on a triclober clamp and you can take it in, you can take it out, and it means then that your boiler, you can use it and abuse it as you feel, and you can take it out, blank it off.
And
There's
then
some really nice systems.
take it out for easier cleaning of the element and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it makes sense. You know?
Look, and as I said, these things, they're not that expensive.
They're not, and it's not worth. I think the main point here is that it's not worth cutting corners.
No.
Because if something goes wrong, you know, not only are you going to burn your house down, but you're also not going to be covered.
And like, you need to be aware as well. Like, you could be doing damage and you're not even aware of it.
Yeah.
It's a cumulative effect.
Yeah.
The loose connections, they get worse and worse, and eventually you will have a fire.
The loose connections on your cable.
At the back of the sockets, yeah, where something has been heating and cooling and heating and cooling.
Oh,
the screws
it's
will
working loose, of course, yeah.
And then the loose connection gets even hotter, and eventually you have a circuit that's overloaded, stressed, and something's got to give somewhere.
No, I've seen sockets myself where they've got that kind of yellowy effect.
That's it.
Because
yeah.
they've been drawing too much power.
Exactly.
And it is quite scary.
Yeah, I've gone to houses and have to change things, and you see the surface at the socket, you think, oh, that's as bad, and then you look at the back, and the insulation on the cable has all crumbled away. The cable itself has gone brittle. The socket is ready to fall apart, and it's only at that stage that people see the symptoms at the front, and in the meantime they could have had a fire.
If the MCB doesn't blow and you're running two elements, would that suggest there might be an electrical fault in your house?
No, the MCBs, they have a discrimination built into them, so they should trip at 20 amps, but it's always plus or minus a little bit as well. Like, they're not going to trip exactly at 20 amps every time, but if you're running a 22 amp load for a few minutes, it should trip. It should.
Okay. But I think the most important point is that your cable is heating,
yes.
contracting, and it's breaking down and it's going brittle,
Yeah.
and then eventually your live and your neutral are going to touch and they're going to arc, and then that's what's going to cause your fire.
Possibly, but the loose connections are the big one, where it gets hot. If it touches, your breaker should definitely trip. But if you've reached that stage, your house wiring is damaged as well, so that's costly to get repaired too.
So if your socket is damaged, then more than likely your cable is damaged as well.
If you've been overloading it, yes.
So replacing the socket alone is not going to solve the problem.
Replacing the socket alone, potentially no. An electrician, if he's aware of what's been happening, will good practice will be to go through the whole system, check each socket. Also, good practice will be to do an earth loop impedance test, an insulation resistance test. You know, these visits will help and cost money. If you've got a problem that could have been avoided at the beginning, it's probably best avoided altogether at the beginning.
So the moral of the story is, you know, get it done by a competent person, and you know, don't take chances.
Well, especially with electricity, don't take chances. It's your home. It's your castle. You know, keep it that way.
Mark, thanks for your time.
No worries,
very informative, and we'll talk to you soon.
Definitely.
Thanks for watching our video. This is our second Brew Shed video. If you could like and subscribe and share, we'd appreciate it, and we'll talk to you all again soon.